Hey guys, I've got my sketchbook and charcoal pencils out today. With the new Lion King movie coming out, I couldn't help but be inspired to draw a line with these pencils. After the portrait in my last video, I knew that I wanted to do something a little bit more detailed and realistic. I felt like I had a better handle on what these pencils could and couldn't do, and I was ready to have fun with them. To sketch out the line, I pulled the image up in Photoshop, desaturated it, and lightened the opacity down so that I could see the lines better, and then I broke the image into the lines of major shapes and angles. Basically, I make the image into roughly the shape of my paper, in this case to fit my sketchbook paper. Then I just eyed where the lines went in my sketchbook. This takes a little bit more work than tracing, but it's a lot quicker than drawing out a grid, and it gives me better practice with my freehand sketching. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as I'm close and my proportions are close, then I'm happy. It takes a while to get all of the details mapped out, and the more lines and sketchwork I have down, the better I can see where other things need to go. Like I use the lines to tell me where the nose should sit and the angle of the jawline. The mouth was a little bit tricky because I didn't see until later that the right eye was just a little bit off and I had been using it as a guide. But it only takes a little bit of adjusting here and there, and I don't add any of the charcoal until I'm happy with where everything is sitting. I knew when I started this that I wanted to do a lot of negative drawing, basically darkening up areas and then erasing or drawing white into that to get my highlights and my details. With the main, I'm darkening up the left side of the paper where I know that it's going to be all black, and I'm going in the general direction of the hair as I pull the pencil strokes towards his face. Throughout this entire drawing, I am trying my best to work from left to right so that my hand isn't smudging everything out while I'm drawing and making a giant mess. Everywhere that I lay down charcoal will be blended out with a soft paintbrush, and any excess charcoal powder that's sitting on the paper can be used to blend out the lightest of the shadows. After I block in most of the hair in the mane, I go through with a Tombow mono eraser to pull out some of the more defined hairs. The hair closest to his head is going to be darker, so I leave that kind of dark, and I don't worry about every single hair, just the clumps and the shapes. I'll pull out a few highlights just to define it a little bit better, but I'm not really going for every hair. Even though the hair up top is almost black in the picture, I'm still trying to go with the direction of the fur. When I blend with the brushes, I'm also going with the direction of the fur too, not across it or in a scribbling motion or with circles. I don't draw with a pencil or anywhere that I'm going to want highlights, because when I blend with the brush, the charcoal powder from all of the shadows will pull into those and blend those highlights out. If I get the highlights too dark after that, I can always lift them up with the Tombow mono eraser. After I pulled out all of the highlights, I move on to the fur on his face. Here I was making sure that my 2B charcoal pencil was as sharp as I could get it. The fur on his face is not as long as on the mane, so I needed to make sure that I had really light, short strokes, making sure that I'm still following with the direction of the fur. The direction of the fur is especially important in the face because the fur is basically mapping out the structure of his face. His eyes were my favorite part. I added the darkness around the eyelid and lashes, and in almost every single eye, whether it's animal or human, there's a darker shadow directly under the top lid. I used the excess charcoal powder and a brush to lightly shade in the rest of his eye, following as close as I could to my reference photo. Anywhere that there were highlights in his eye, I used my eraser to lift out, then I used the white charcoal for the lightest of the highlights. The wrinkles on his forehead are a bit tricky. On the forehead, the hairs are constantly changing direction due to his brows and that thick skin on his forehead, so I just made sure that even if my pencil strokes weren't perfect, I was still following along as best as I could in the direction that they were in the photo. I lay down the pencil strokes, blend them out, erase some of the fur direction, blend again, and darken as needed. Basically a rinse and repeat process. His nose was basically one big dark shape, so it was pretty easy to block it in and blend it out. Again, the fur on his mouth is curving, and the direction of the fur is important to make sure that it's not looking flat. After I block in the mouth and the nose with the charcoal, I use the excess powder from that to shade in the lighter fur. A little bit of this charcoal goes a long way. I love that about working with these pencils. When I don't have any more excess charcoal, I can easily grab some from my sandpaper block that I use to sharpen the charcoal pencil tips. It's too hard to continually sharpen them in my hand sharpener, and this way it's a little bit less wasteful. For the hair on his chin, I blended the darker fur around it, and I used the charcoal on the brush with a bit of the pencil to map out the direction just like I did with the mane, and I'll be coming in with an eraser and pulling out the lighter fur. The more layers I have of blending and then lightening and then blending again and erasing highlights, the more dimension it gives and it looks more realistic. Just like Shrek, my drawings are like onions, they have layers. Anyway, I continue to map out the fur, darkening areas as needed and using the lightest of the pencil strokes to map things in. I didn't want to be drawing out every single hair, so I let my blending brush do a lot of the work for me. The white charcoal pencil comes in handy here too, letting me get the really fine white lines on top of those shadows. I love how well the white pencil shows up on top of the black. Anyone who works in colored pencils knows. Once you have color down, it's so hard to get pure white on top of that. It's pretty weird when a simple white pencil makes me this happy. The great thing about using gray paper is I was able to let a lot of this paper show through. On the bridge of his nose, I only added what I needed to show the curve of it and some of the finer hairs down by the nose, but I really let the paper do most of the heavy lifting where I could. Also, when I erase out the highlights, it works out a lot better because I don't have to worry about lifting it so much that it turns back to white like it would if I'd used a white paper. I drew out the second eye the exact same as the first. The only time I used my pencil in the eye was in the darkest parts. The rest, I used some of the powder. If I had tried to draw it out with the pencil, it just would have been too dark and it would have been too hard to make it look realistic and get those lighter shadows in there. The right side of his face really shows the curve of his cheekbone and jaw. While I did come in with a lot of the directional fur, I let my brush do a lot of the contouring. I did my best to keep my brush strokes going with the curves, and I just keep darkening areas as needed until I'm happy with the contrasts. Then I come over it again with the white pencil for the highlights and also lifting out some with the eraser before blending it out again. On the right side, I didn't want it to be in as much focus as the left side. I kind of wanted it softened out so that your eye isn't really drawn to it, but I still went with the direction of the fur. You can see I was able to be pretty sloppy with my pencil strokes because when I blend it out with a brush, it all comes together. When I lift out the shapes and clumps, that pretty much covers any of that messiness. I have to say, this is one of the most fun drawings I have done in a long time. I loved how fast I was able to get a realistic effect, and this is one of my new favorite mediums. I hope you guys liked this video. It was a lot of fun to make, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time.